oceans, we know that there's a greater frequency and a greater severity of strong hurricanes. When we look at the wildfire history, especially in our part of the country, we see that there are more wildfires in the last 10 years, destroying more acreage, destroying more values than ever before. So if we believe that we have a responsibility in our industry to make a change in the way the economy works, we do things with climate change, and we fight that we need to do something to continue to mitigate it. Back to green buildings. You know, they're unique in the environmental world. How often do we hear about trade-offs that have to be made between an environmental movement and business? You know, a few years ago it was the spotted owl in the Pacific Northwest that was impacting someone's desire to log a large section of the state of Washington. And there was a lot of fighting back and forth. That, you know, the spotted owl was standing in the way of progress. I think if we look at the history of environmentalism, there has been that conflict. There has been that trade-off between what we want to do that's good for the world we live in and what businesses want to do that's good for their bottom line, good for their investors, good for their employees. We don't see that with green buildings. In fact, we see just the opposite. Everybody wins. For the building owner, the tenants, for the people occupying the building, to the rest of us that are sitting here wondering what we're going to do with that sea level rise of 1 to 3 to 7 meters doesn't be happening. Everybody wins, and I think that's a very important proposition that we look at, and that's what gives us hope. Let's get into some of these issues, some of these wins. The economics for building owners. Buildings in the United States use 40% of all of the energy, 70% of all the electricity. And if we're looking to control CO2 emissions, here's a good place to start. 38% of U.S. CO2 emissions come from buildings, more than from automobiles. So if we're concerned about climate change, we can do something with energy use in green buildings, and we can have a big impact. Green buildings typically, and this is information from the U.S. Green Building Council, use 30% less energy than a traditional building. That's a big number, that's a big reduction. There's something called the 2030 challenge in the architectural community, and that's talking about by the year 2030, we would like to make our buildings net zero carbon impact with alternative energy, with energy efficiency, and there are buildings moving now to that net zero position. A building that has